Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Benoit, and today we're looking at weeding our collection using the Crew method to analyze which books need to be weeded out. So, first off, Crew means that I need to be continuously reviewing and evaluating the collection to see what needs to be weeded. And I am looking at the collection at Lady Bird Johnson Middle School, which is where I am a mentee. I really like the acronyms MUSTY, which MUSTY stands for misleading, ugly, superseded, trivial, irrelevant, or can be found elsewhere. And the one I'm really going to focus on are worst, worn out of date, rarely used, supplied elsewhere, or T for trivial or faddish. Now, the area of analysis that I'm going to look at is the fiction fantasy section, mostly because the nonfiction section has recently been weeded. So the fiction section still needs a little bit of work. And my general impression was the section for fantasy fiction, it was definitely overcrowded. There were a lot of books that were worn and torn. There were some books that were just outdated. There were also titles that had limited checkouts in the last 10 years, so they were rarely used. And probably the most important one was some of them were irrelevant and diversity needed to be added to this collection. So, my main criteria for searching that I applied were these books over 10 years old? And was the circulation 1 to 3 times in the last 10 years? And of course, were some of them torn and worn out and needed to just be replaced? So I limited my search, obviously, to fantasy fiction. The search was limited by publication date, and then I based it on the total checkouts in the last 10 years. And the results I found were actually pretty interesting. There were books still from the 90s, and some of them haven't even been checked out in the last 10 years, so for sure needed to be weeded out. The first two, The Ancient One and Rip Van Winkle from 92 and 99, had zero checkouts. There were some that had one checkout in the last 10 years, but were probably just from the librarian using them to do book talks and things, but weren't actually checked out by students. So Sandy's book, Perlo the Bold, The Fires of Merlin, and The Mirrors of Merlin were all from 97, 8, and 9, and were only checked out one time. Also, additional books I still wanted to look at were the twos and threes. They may have been checked out in the past 10 years, but very rarely. And the publication dates were from ranging from 1990 all the way to 99. So Poppy, Meryl of Redwall, Poppy and Rye, Seven Songs of Merlin, Madamo, and Afternoon of the Elves. Some of these books from these 10 that I chose were in series form. So I'm sure they were purchased within those, 5 or 10 years in the 90s because they were of series, but that's 20 years ago. And some of these books have only been checked out 2 or 3 times in the last 10 to 20 years. How many items were read from the collection? I definitely took those 10 items out that were, from 10 years old, only been checked out, 1 to 3 times. But there were definitely, more books that I could have even taken out after that. And I also looked at some of the books that, were, checked out 10 times or more, but they were just removed for wear and tear. They've still been constantly checked out, but the versions of them just needed to be updated a little bit. So I do think that I weeded the collection effectively. 20 items have been removed, and this definitely makes more room for diverse books that fit the community of users at the school now. However, I could have even gone even further and probably taken 10 to 20 more items additionally out based on that criteria. So I was only looking in the 90s, but I could have looked in the early 2000s as well, and even found books that have only been checked out 2 or 3 times since then. So this was a very interesting way to weed your collection, and I'll definitely be using it in the future. Some of my references were from obviously the book, and from the American Library Association. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to